Okay, so trying to like keep up with all the financial information out there is like
Oh, yeah.
it feels impossible.
It's overwhelming.
Really overwhelming, yeah.
It is.
You've got like market data, company earnings, global trends just hitting you from every direction.
It really is. And the hardest part, I think, isn't even just the, like, amount of data.
Right.
It's how disconnected everything is.
Yeah.
Trying to actually understand, like, the why
The bigger picture.
behind all of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we're doing a deep dive today into this new tool, FinR1.
Okay.
And it's not just some AI.
Right.
It's a large language model that they built for like specifically financial reasoning.
Interesting.
So almost like having a super smart analyst,
Right.
trying to work through all this stuff too.
Yeah. And the material you sent really gets into, like, how they built it and what it can actually do.
Yeah, so our mission today is to kind of get under the hood of FinR1 and see how it's like tackling all those big problems that we have in finance.
Makes sense.
So like data being everywhere, reasoning that no one really understands, and applying those learnings to like, slightly different situations.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going
Yeah.
to be looking at this research paper that they put out
Mhm.
to explain how they built it and tested it.
Cool.
So why don't we start by looking at those, like, core problems that this is meant to solve?
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the first big problem, which is that all this financial data is fragmented.
Okay.
And the paper really points out that it's not even just that we have a ton of information,
Right.
it's that it's inconsistent. Maybe you see the same data like multiple times, but a little different,
Sure.
or key pieces are missing.
Right.
So it's like trying to, get a clear picture, but you only have half the puzzle pieces.
It is. And, like,
Yeah.
imagine you're trying to look at a company's financial health.
Yeah.
You're going to go look at their filings, news articles, reports, maybe even just, like, sentiment online,
Right.
pulling all of that together and then making sure it's all accurate. And then understanding what it means.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot for anyone to do, let alone an AI.
Yeah. Yeah. So the second big problem that they highlight is this idea of black box reasoning,
Okay.
where these AI models just give an answer,
Yeah.
but they don't really show their work.
Yeah.
And in finance, that's a big problem.
Especially because it's so heavily regulated.
Right. You have to understand why a decision was made.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like a high stakes decision.
It's about accountability,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
transparency.
Exactly.
Like, if you can't explain why you did something,
Uh-huh.
how can anyone trust you to do it?
Right. And how can you even trust yourself?
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. So, and the third problem is this idea of insufficient generalization ability,
Yeah.
which basically means an AI might be really good at one thing,
Yeah.
like predicting stock prices for tech companies,
Uh-huh.
but then like fall apart if you ask it about bonds or if the economy suddenly shifts.
Right. So we can only do this one thing, and it's not even that useful in the real world because things change all the time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So those are some of the like big challenges.
Okay.
And now we can talk about FinR1, which is what they built to address all this.
Okay.
So what exactly is it and what makes it different?
So FinR1 is a large language model specifically for finance, and it's actually pretty small.
Okay.
It's only got about 7 billion parameters.
No. I would think it would need to be much bigger to understand all this complex stuff.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But that's one of the things that they're highlighting about it.
Okay.
It's actually really efficient.
Okay.
So it doesn't take that much power to run.
Oh, okay.
And their main goal is really to have, like, accurate and understandable decision making.
Okay, so it's not just about getting the answer. It's about knowing how you got there.
Exactly.
I mean, so how did they actually build this thing?
Right. So they actually built it in two main stages.
Okay.
The first was all about getting the right data.
Mhm.
And they call this FinR1 data. And then the second part was training the model using this data.
Got it. So walk me through this first stage, this FinR1 data.
All right. So they built this high-quality data set with about 60,091 chains of thought in both Chinese and English.
Okay, so what are chains of thought?
It's like if you think about a math problem,
Okay.
it's showing your work.
Okay.
So you can see how it got to the answer.
Gotcha.
And it was for both, like, reasoning questions and just, like, regular financial questions.
Okay, and why'd they do it in two languages?
Well, more people can use it
Right. Makes
if
sense.
it's in more languages.
Yeah.
And they pulled from a bunch of different data sets to do this.
Okay, what kind of data sets?
So they used a bunch of these open source data sets.
Okay.
Things like Ant Finance, which comes from Alipay,
Mhm.
Finance IQ, which is from Dexioma DI Team.
Okay.
They used Quant Trading Instruct, which is from Finance QT.
Uh-huh.
And they also used ones specifically for question answering like ConfinQA and FinQA.
Got it.
And then they also used Twitter financial news sentiment to understand like the sentiment around all this stuff.
Got it.
Finance Instruct 500K, FinCorpus,
Okay.
and FinKeyGE.
So a lot of different sources.
Yeah, a whole bunch.
And they also use their own data too, right?
Yeah, they did. So they used this thing called Financial Postgraduate Entrance Exam Dataset.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, or FinP for short.
Okay.
And this dataset had like 350 calculation problems that they took from actual exams.
Wow.
Yeah, and they got all these questions in PDF form, converted them to digital, used a tool that they developed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then they extracted all these question and answer pairs.
That's a lot of work.
And then on top of that, all 350 pairs were reviewed by experts.
Oh, wow. That's some serious commitment to data.
Yeah, it was really impressive.
Yeah, so the paper like breaks down this FinR1 data into different categories.
It does.
Like financial code, professional knowledge, business knowledge. Like what are the big takeaways there?
Well, if you look at it, business knowledge, both the reasoning and non-reasoning ones make up almost 80% of the data,
Wow. Okay.
which shows you how much they're focusing on teaching the model how finance actually works,
Okay.
not just like the textbook definition.
Right.
Professional knowledge was another big part at about 22%, and that's really just covering the core concepts. And then the financial code stuff was actually super tiny,
Okay.
only 0.2%.
So they were really focused on building something that understands financial concepts,
Exactly.
not just like, generating code.
Yeah, more like an analyst.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how did they get from all this raw data to these chains of thought?
Right, so they had this two-step process,
Okay.
data distillation and data filtering.
Okay.
So for distillation, they used another large language model called DeepSeek R1
Okay.
to basically generate these chains of thought reasoning for all the questions in their different data sets.
Oh, so they used an AI to help them make the data.
Yeah, basically. And they fine-tuned it so that the temperature was at 0.6,
Okay.
which controls how creative it could be in the reasoning.
Okay.
And they made sure all the math answers were in this like boxed notation. And every explanation started on a new line just to keep things consistent.
Wow. So much attention to detail.
Yeah, but then they had to make sure the reasoning was good.
Right. So that's where the filtering comes in.
Yeah, and that had two parts.
Okay.
They had to check that the answers were right,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to pick the best reasoning.
Got it. So how'd they do the answer check?
So if the answer was objective, they would just check it against the data set.
Oh, okay.
But for the more subjective ones, they actually used another large language model to judge it.
Okay, so like a panel of AI judges.
Yeah, basically.
So who did they pick?
So they compared GPT-4o and Qwen 2.572b Instruct,
Mm-hmm.
and Qwen was more accurate.
Okay.
It had like a 99.6% accuracy rate.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what about the reasoning? Like, how did they pick the best explanations?
So they looked at 7 different things.
Okay.
They looked at internal consistency, if it was relevant to the question, the logic of the steps,
Mm-hmm.
if the content was diverse,
Okay.
if it fit with like the finance world,
Mm-hmm.
and if it followed the instructions.
Wow.
And they compared Qwen with actual humans, and they were pretty much in agreement.
Wow. So the AI is as good as a person at this.
Basically, yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
It is.
Okay, so now they've got this like awesome data set of questions, answers, and explanations.
Right.
How do they actually train FinR1?
Okay, so they have 2 phases for the training too.
Okay,
Supervised fine-tuning and reinforcement learning.
got it. So let's start with this supervised fine-tuning. What was the point of that?
So basically, they took this base model, Qwen 2.57b Instruct, and they fine-tuned it
Okay.
using their awesome new FinR1 data.
Got it.
And they used ConfinQA and FinQA datasets here specifically.
Okay.
And they set it up so that each question had the reasoning in these think tags
Mm-hmm.
and the answer and answer tags.
So they were teaching it the structure.
Yeah, and it worked. The model got much better at the reasoning tasks.
Okay. And what about this reinforcement learning? What was that for?
So for that, they wanted to refine the model's answers.
Mm-hmm.
And they used this algorithm called Group Relative Policy Optimization, or GRPO.
Okay.
And they used more financial question and answer data here.
Okay.
And they had a 2-part reward system.
Okay. A 2-part reward system. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so the first was a format reward.
Okay.
If the output had exactly one think and one answer tag and nothing else,
Okay.
it would get a point.
Mm-hmm.
If not, it would get a 0.
So that was to help make the output structured and easy to understand.
Exactly.
Okay. What was the second part?
So the second part was an accuracy reward.
Okay.
And they use another powerful language model as a Judge Quen 2.5 Max.
Okay.
And look at the answer tag.
Mm-hmm.
And if the content matched the answer, it would get a point.
Okay.
And if not, it would get 0.
So, like, the AI is grading its own homework?
Basically, yeah.
But they said that, like, simple rule-based checking wouldn't work here.
Right, because sometimes things would be, like, mathematically the same, but look different.
Okay, so they needed something more sophisticated.
Yeah, something they could understand the meaning.
Right. Okay, so the reinforcement learning stage was making sure the answer was right, but also presented in a useful way.
Exactly.
Okay, so after all this work building and training this thing, how did it actually do?
So they tested it on a bunch of these benchmarks.
Okay.
FinQA, ConFinQA, Ant Finance TFNS, and Finance Instruct 500K.
Wow.
And even though it's pretty small, it got an average score of 75.2.
Okay.
And that put it in second place overall.
Second place? Wow, who beat it?
So the one that beat it was called DeepSeek R1, but that was a much bigger model.
Okay.
It had 671 billion parameters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so FitR1 was way smaller and still did really well.
That's impressive.
And it actually beat DeepSeek R1 to Stillama 70B by almost 9 points.
So they're saying that their approach was just, like, really efficient.
Yeah, seems like it.
That's pretty cool. And where did it do the best?
So it did really well on FinQA and ConFinQA,
Okay.
which are those ones that focus on reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
It got a 76 on FinQA and an 85 on ConFinQA.
Wow. Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. It's designed for reasoning, so it should do well there.
Exactly.
And they saw some big improvements compared to the base model, too.
Yeah, on the other benchmark, so it seems like it could adapt pretty well.
Okay, that's good. So in the paper, they talked about some real-world uses for this, too.
Yeah, they mentioned financial compliance and robo-advisory.
Okay.
So it could help with things like making sure you're following the rules
Right.
or giving better financial advice.
Got it. So it sounds like this is a really promising thing,
It does.
especially since it's so good at understanding its own reasoning.
Yeah, and doing it efficiently.
Yeah, but they said there's still some work to do, right?
Yeah, they mentioned 3 limitations.
Okay.
So the first was that the training data was still focused on these specific questions from ConFinQ and FinQus mostly.
Okay.
And they want to use more data in the future
Right.
to make it better in other stuff.
Okay, what was the second limitation?
So the second one is that right now it only works with text.
Okay.
And a lot of financial stuff has charts and graphs.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So they want to add that capability in the future.
Yeah, because so much information is visual.
Exactly.
Okay, what was the third one?
So the third one is that they were mostly testing it on questions with clear answers.
Mm-hmm.
And in the real world, sometimes there isn't a clear answer.
Right, yeah.
So they want to figure out how to test it on more open-ended questions.
So even though they've done all this great work, they're already thinking about how to make it even better.
Yeah, they're not stopping here.
That's awesome. So what else are they going to work on in the future?
So besides those limitations, they want to figure out how to integrate it into more of like the fintech world.
Okay.
So using it with different types of data, text, images, video,
Yep.
and they want to use it in risk management and compliance too.
Got it. So this is really just the beginning.
It seems like it.
That's pretty cool. It's amazing to see them building these specialized AIs for such an important field.
Yeah, and it really shows how important the data and the training process are.
Yeah, because even though it was small, it was still really good.
Exactly.
And they were very deliberate about the whole process.
Yeah, so it makes you think about what's next.
It really does. What happens when we have these like super smart AIs helping us with finance?
Right.
How will we analyze information, make decisions, even regulate things differently? What kind of new problems might come up as these things get more powerful and more people start using them?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really is. I think we could probably talk about this all day.
Yeah, me too.
But it is definitely something for everyone out there to kind of ponder.
Yeah.
Like, how might something like FinR1 change how you understand finance and money and investing?
Yeah.
It's a lot to consider. Well, this was really interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for coming.